Marcus and Elena Castellanos never imagined they'd be sitting in a sterile hospital room, clutching each other's hands, while a doctor delivered words that would shatter their world into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Their 8-month-old daughter, Sophia, lay sleeping in Elena's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with the innocent rhythm of a child who had no idea that her parents were about to learn she was dying. The afternoon light, filtering through the consultation room's narrow window, cast long shadows across Dr. Sarah Chen's desk, where Sophia's MRI scans lay spread like a roadmap to heartbreak. Marcus could see the dark mass even without medical training, a shadow that didn't belong, pressing against the delicate architecture of his daughter's brain. Elena's fingers trembled as she unconsciously smoothed Sophia's wispy black hair, the same gesture she'd made 1,000 times during feeding and bedtime routines, now taking on the desperate quality of a prayer. "The tumor is located in an extremely challenging position," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality that came from years of delivering impossible news to devastated families. Surgery would be inadvisable given Sophia's age, and the mass's proximity to critical brain structures. Marcus felt the words wash over him like ice water, each clinical term, inoperable, aggressive, limited options, landing with the weight of a death sentence. He watched Elena's face crumble as the reality settled in, her dark eyes filling with tears that she refused to let fall in front of the doctor. This wasn't how their story was supposed to unfold. Just 3 months ago, they'd been celebrating Sophia's first successful attempts at crawling, taking photos of her gap-toothed smile, planning her first birthday party. "How long?" Elena whispered, the question barely audible above the hum of the hospital's ventilation system. Dr. Chen's pause stretched like an eternity. "We're looking at months, not years." "I'm sorry." The silence that followed felt suffocating, broken only by Sophia's soft breathing and the distant sounds of hospital life continuing beyond their shattered world. Marcus stared at his daughter's peaceful face, knowing that everything, every hope, every dream, every assumption about their future had just changed forever. The weeks that followed blurred into a suffocating routine of hospital corridors, waiting rooms and sleepless nights that stretched like an endless purgatory. Marcus and Elena's life became a careful choreography of medications, feeding schedules, and anxious monitoring, each day marked by the terrible arithmetic of counting Sophia's breaths, measuring her responses, searching for signs that might hint at hope or herald decline. Elena rarely left Sophia's side, transforming their living room into a makeshift medical station complete with monitors, syringes, and a growing collection of prescription bottles that rattled like dice with each movement. She'd memorized every subtle change in Sophia's breathing patterns, the way her daughter's tiny fingers would curl during particularly restless moments, the soft whimpers that escaped during what the doctors called episodes of discomfort. The clinical language felt inadequate for describing the way Sophia's body seemed to be betraying her, the tumor pressing against the very center of everything that made her their bright, curious little girl. Marcus threw himself into research, with the desperate intensity of a man drowning, spending hours hunched over his laptop in the kitchen, scrolling through medical journals and experimental treatments, reaching out to specialists across the country who might offer a second opinion, or a sliver of possibility. His phone became an extension of his hand, constantly dialing numbers, leaving voicemails with doctors who rarely called back, chasing leads that invariably ended in polite rejections or cautious headshakes. Friends and family visited in waves, bringing casseroles and offering platitudes that felt hollow against the magnitude of their crisis. "She's such a fighter," they'd say, or "miracles happen every day," words that bounced off Marcus and Elena like rain on stone. How could they explain that watching your child slowly slip away required a different kind of strength, one that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with simply continuing to breathe when breathing felt impossible. During the long nights, when Sophia finally settled into fitful sleep, Marcus and Elena would collapse together on their couch, too exhausted to speak, too wired to rest. Elena's head would find its familiar place on Marcus's shoulder, and they'd listen to the soft whoosh of Sophia's breathing monitor, a mechanical lullaby that had become the soundtrack to their new reality. It was during one of these quiet vigils that Elena whispered the words that had been haunting them both. "What if the doctors are wrong? What if there's something else we haven't tried?" The coffee shop near St. Mary's Hospital had become Marcus and Elena's unofficial sanctuary, a place where they could steal moments away from the suffocating atmosphere of medical equipment and whispered consultations. It was here, surrounded by the comforting hum of espresso machines and ordinary conversations, that they tried to remember who they'd been before their world narrowed to the size of a hospital room. Elena stirred her untouched latte absently, watching the foam dissolve into meaningless swirls while Marcus checked his phone for the 100th time that morning. They'd left Sophia with Elena's mother for an hour. The first time in weeks they'd been apart from their daughter for more than 20 minutes. The freedom felt both liberating and terrifying, as if stepping away might somehow invite disaster. Marcus? Elena? They looked up to see a familiar face approaching their corner table, and Elena felt her heart lift for the first time in days. Father Miguel Rodriguez had been Marcus's closest friend since childhood, the kind of bond forged in elementary school soccer games and maintained through college, marriage, and the inevitable drift of adult life. But unlike most childhood friendships that survived on Christmas cards and social media likes, Miguel had chosen a path that led him far from their suburban world, first to seminary, then to advanced theological studies, and eventually to a position that neither Marcus nor Elena fully understood but knew involved frequent travel to Rome. "Miguel," Marcus stood, embracing his friend with the fierce gratitude of a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "I can't believe you're here." "I got your message," Miguel said, his voice carrying the same warmth Elena remembered from their wedding, where he'd delivered a homily about love conquering all obstacles. Now, looking at his serious expression, she wondered if he still believed those words. "I came as soon as I could arrange leave from the Vatican." Elena felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps the memory of what hope felt like. Miguel had always possessed an unwavering faith that had both inspired and occasionally irritated her during their younger years, his certainty about divine providence seeming almost naive in the face of real-world struggles. But now, sitting across from him while their daughter fought for her life, his presence felt like an anchor in a storm. "How is Sophia?" Miguel asked gently. The question hung in the air, heavy with all the things they couldn't bring themselves to say aloud. Marcus's jaw tightened, and Elena felt the familiar weight of tears threatening to spill. "She's—" Elena began, then stopped, unable to find words that wouldn't break her completely. Miguel reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with his own. "Tell me everything." 3 days after their coffee shop conversation, Marcus found himself pacing the kitchen while Miguel's voice crackled through the speakerphone, the international connection adding an ethereal quality to words that already seemed too extraordinary to be real. Elena sat at their dining table, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms, both of them hanging on every syllable as their childhood friend spoke from halfway around the world. "Pope Leo XIV has agreed to a private audience," Miguel said, his voice barely containing the wonder he felt at his own words. "It's unprecedented, Marcus. Private audiences like this, they don't happen for families like us." But when I explained Sophia's situation to Cardinal Benedetti, something changed in his expression. He said the Holy Father had been moved by similar cases recently. Elena's grip tightened around Sophia. her daughter's warm weight suddenly feeling both precious and fragile. The possibility Miguel was describing felt too immense to process, like trying to hold an ocean in cupped hands. After weeks of medical dead ends and carefully worded condolences, the idea that someone, anyone, might offer them hope seemed almost dangerous to contemplate. "What would we need to do?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse with the effort of keeping his emotions in check. Elena could see him struggling with the same internal battle that was tearing at her own heart, the desperate desire to believe warring against the fear of another crushing disappointment. "You'd need to fly to Rome within the next 2 weeks," Miguel explained. "Sophia's medical records would need to be translated and submitted ahead of time. The Vatican has protocols for these situations, medical clearances, travel documentation. It's not simple, but it's possible." Elena closed her eyes, imagining the journey with their desperately ill daughter, the logistics of traveling with medical equipment, the crushing weight of expectation that would follow them across an ocean. They'd exhausted their savings on treatments and specialists. A trip to Rome felt as impossible as reaching the moon. As if reading her thoughts, Miguel continued, "There are funds available through Catholic charities for situations like this. Families in your circumstances." The pause hung heavy with unspoken understanding. Families with dying children, families running out of time and options, families desperate enough to cross the world for a prayer. Marcus sank into the chair beside Elena, reaching out to touch Sophia's tiny hand. "Miguel, what if nothing happens? What if we get there and then you'll have tried everything?" Miguel said softly, "And sometimes, Marcus, that's all faith asks of us." The departure gate at JFK Airport buzzed with the typical chaos of international travel, but Marcus and Elena existed in a bubble of anxious silence, their world reduced to the portable medical equipment surrounding Sophia's specialized travel carrier. Elena's hands trembled as she checked the oxygen levels for the dozenth time, her maternal instincts warring with the surreal reality that they were about to carry their dying daughter across an ocean on what felt like the most desperate pilgrimage in history. Sophia had grown noticeably weaker in the days since Miguel's call, her periods of alertness becoming shorter, her breathing more labored. The doctors had been reluctant to clear her for travel, offering carefully worded warnings about the risks of high altitude and cabin pressure on her compromised neurological system. But Elena had seen something in Dr. Chen's eyes when she'd signed the medical clearance. Not hope exactly, but perhaps an understanding that sometimes medicine reached its limits and parents had to venture into territories that existed beyond charts and protocols. During the 8-hour flight, Marcus found himself studying the faces of fellow passengers, wondering what they would think if they knew the nature of their journey. The businessman typing furiously on his laptop, the elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle, the young mother entertaining her toddler with picture books, all of them traveling toward ordinary destinations for ordinary reasons, while he and Elena flew toward what felt like either a miracle or the final chapter of their daughter's brief story. Elena rarely left Sophia's side during the flight, monitoring every breath, every slight change in color or expression. When turbulence struck over the Atlantic, she instinctively covered Sophia's tiny body with her own, as if her love alone could shield their daughter from the violence of a world that seemed determined to take her away. Marcus watched his wife transform into something fierce and protective, a lioness guarding her cub against forces neither of them could control. As their plane descended toward Rome's Fiumicino airport, the ancient city sprawling beneath them, in the golden light of early morning, Marcus felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. This was the city of saints and martyrs, of miracles and suffering, of faith tested in the crucible of human experience. Through the small airplane window, he could see the dome of St. Peter's Basilica rising in the distance, and for the first time since Dr. Chen had delivered Sophia's diagnosis, he allowed himself to whisper a prayer. Miguel waited for them at customs, his familiar face a beacon of comfort in the overwhelming vastness of their undertaking. "Welcome to Rome," he said simply, his eyes reflecting both the joy of reunion and the gravity of what lay ahead. The preparation room beneath St. Peter's Basilica felt suspended between earth and heaven, its ancient stone walls bearing witness to centuries of prayer and pilgrimage. Marcus and Elena sat in upholstered chairs that seemed too elegant for their current state, travel-worn, emotionally raw, clutching their dying daughter as if she might disappear at any moment. Above them, the weight of Michelangelo's dome pressed down like a benediction, while the distant sounds of morning mass filtered through the marble corridors. Cardinal Benedetti moved through the room with the practiced grace of a man accustomed to facilitating encounters between the divine and the desperate. His English carried a gentle Italian accent that somehow made everything sound like a prayer. "His Holiness Pope Leo XIV will see you shortly," he explained, his eyes taking in Sophia's pale complexion and the portable medical equipment that had traveled with them from New York. "He has been informed of Sophia's condition and has asked that we keep the visit brief but meaningful." Elena found herself studying every detail of the room, as if memorizing it might somehow preserve the moment forever. The way afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the Persian carpet. The subtle scent of incense that seemed woven into the very stones. The quiet efficiency of Vatican staff who moved like ghosts in their dark suits, orchestrating something that felt too sacred for logistics. Sophia stirred restlessly in Elena's arms, her breathing more labored than it had been that morning. The journey had taken its toll, and Elena could see the concern flickering in Miguel's eyes as he watched his goddaughter struggle against forces that seemed to be winning. The portable oxygen tank beside Elena's chair hissed softly, a mechanical reminder of how tenuous their daughter's grip on life had become. "She's beautiful," Cardinal Benedetti said softly, approaching to look at Sophia with the gentle expression of a man who had seen countless families in their position. "His Holiness has a special love for children. He often says they remind him that God's love comes to us without conditions, without requirements, pure and perfect." Marcus felt his throat tighten at the cardinal's words. After months of medical protocols and treatment requirements, the idea of unconditional love felt revolutionary. He reached out to touch Sophia's forehead, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his palm, and wondered if this moment might be the last time he would be able to hope for something beyond medical statistics and grim prognoses. A soft knock at the door made them all turn. "His Holiness is ready to receive you," a young priest announced, and suddenly the waiting was over. The papal chamber was smaller than Marcus had imagined, more intimate than imposing, with warm wood panels and simple furnishings that spoke of humility rather than grandeur. Pope Leo XV stood near a window overlooking St. Peter's Square, his white cassock catching the afternoon light as he turned to greet them. Elena felt her breath catch at the sight of his face, lined with years of bearing others' sorrows, yet radiating a peace that seemed to fill the entire room. "Please come," Pope Leo XIV said in accented English, his voice carrying the gentleness of a grandfather welcoming beloved grandchildren. Marcus stepped forward first, Sophia cradled carefully in his arms, Elena close beside him, both of them moving as if walking through a dream that might shatter with too sudden a movement. The Pope's eyes immediately found Sophia, and something profound shifted in his expression. He approached with the reverent care of someone who understood that he was witnessing something sacred, not his own presence, but the fierce love that bound these parents to their dying child. "She is beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to gently touch Sophia's tiny hand. "What is her name?" Sophia, Eleanor managed, her voice barely audible above the soft whisper of her daughter's breathing. Sophia Elena Castellanos. Pope Leo XIV smiled, an expression that seemed to transform not just his face but the very air around them. Sophia. Wisdom, a beautiful name for a beautiful soul. He looked up at Marcus and Elena, his eyes reflecting a compassion that seemed to comprehend the full weight of their journey. You have traveled very far. Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice. The Pope's presence was unlike anything he had expected, not overwhelming authority, but profound peace that made him feel, for the first time in months, that they were exactly where they needed to be. May I? Pope Leo XIV asked, gesturing gently towards Sophia. Elena's heart pounded as she carefully transferred their daughter into the Pope's arms. He held her with the practiced ease of someone who had blessed countless children, but there was something different in his touch, a tenderness that spoke of genuine love rather than mere ceremony. Pope Leo XIV gazed down at Sophia for a long moment, then slowly leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. The room fell into profound silence, broken only by Sophia's soft breathing and the distant sounds of Rome beyond the windows. As he lifted his head, Marcus saw tears glistening in the Pope's eyes. God's love surrounds this little one, he said, quietly, and his mercy knows no bounds. The hotel room near the Vatican felt suspended in time, caught between the sacred encounter they'd just experienced and the uncertain reality that awaited them back home. Marcus sat by the window overlooking cobblestone streets, where pilgrims still wandered in the evening light, while Elena maintained her vigil beside Sophia's portable crib, watching for any sign that something fundamental had changed in their daughter's condition. The memory of Pope Leo XIV's kiss lingered in the room like incense, impossible to capture, yet undeniably present. Elena found herself replaying every detail, the warmth in the Pope's eyes, the gentle way he'd held Sophia, the profound silence that had settled over them all in that sacred moment. But as the hours passed, the weight of expectation began to press against her chest like a physical thing. What if they'd misunderstood? What if the blessing had been purely spiritual, meant to comfort rather than heal? Sophia slept fitfully, her breathing pattern unchanged from the labored rhythm that had become their constant companion. Eleanor checked the monitors every few minutes, searching for improvements that remained stubbornly absent. The oxygen levels held steady, neither better nor worse than they'd been that morning. Her temperature remained slightly elevated, her tiny body still fighting a battle that medical science had declared unwinnable. She seems peaceful, Marcus offered quietly, joining Elena beside the crib. It was true. Despite her physical struggles, Sophia's expression held a tranquility they hadn't seen in weeks. Her features, so often pinched with discomfort, appeared relaxed, almost serene. Elena nodded, afraid to voice the hope that was building in her chest. They'd been disappointed too. Many times before, had learned to guard their hearts against the crushing weight of expectations that led nowhere. Yet something felt different now. Though she couldn't name exactly what had changed, the flight home passed in a blur of careful monitoring and whispered prayers. Elena barely left Sophia's side during the journey, studying every subtle shift in her daughter's breathing, every flicker of movement behind her closed eyelids. Other passengers occasionally glanced their way with the mixture of curiosity and discomfort that sick children often inspired, but Eleanor had grown immune to their stares. As their plane descended toward New York, Marcus reached for Eleanor's hand. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we gave her everything we could." Elena squeezed his fingers, her eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "Look at her," she whispered. "Really look at her." For the first time in months, their daughter's cheeks held the faintest hint of color. Back in their familiar living room, surrounded, By the medical equipment that had become their unwelcome furniture, Marcus and Elena settled into the careful rhythm of observation that had defined their lives for months. But something was different now, not dramatically, not in ways that would show up on medical charts, but in the subtle details that only parents notice when they've spent every waking moment studying their child's face. Elena's mother, Carmen, had been staying with them since their return from Rome, bringing the comfort of empanadas and the steady presence of someone who understood that hope could be as fragile as it was necessary. She watched Elena hover over Sophia's crib with the particular intensity that had developed since their papal audience, noting things that might mean everything or nothing at all. "Her breathing is different," Elena whispered to Marcus on the second. "Morning," her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone afraid to jinx a miracle by speaking it aloud. It was true. Sophia's respiration seemed less labored, though the monitors showed numbers that remained stubbornly within the same ranges they'd been tracking for weeks. Marcus found himself studying their daughter with the intensity of a scientist, cataloguing every small change. Sophia's eyes, when they opened, seemed to track movement more consistently than before. Her tiny fists, which had remained perpetually clenched, occasionally relaxed into open palms. When Eleanor sang their usual lullabies, Sophia appeared to turn her head toward the sound rather than remaining motionless. "Am I imagining things?" Elena asked Carmen during one of Sophia's afternoon naps, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of hope deferred too many times. "I keep thinking I see improvements, but the machines say everything's the same." Carmen, who had raised 4 children, and possessed the particular wisdom that comes from a lifetime of reading faces, studied her granddaughter thoughtfully. "Machines measure what they can measure, mija, but a mother's eyes see things that don't show up on screens." That evening, as Marcus prepared Sophia's nighttime medications, he noticed something that made his hands pause mid-motion. When he'd lifted Sophia to change her position, she had made eye contact with him. Not the vacant stare they'd grown accustomed to, but a focused gaze that seemed to recognize him. The moment lasted only seconds, but it was enough to send his heart racing. Elena appeared in the doorway, drawn by some maternal instinct that told her something significant had just occurred. "What is it?" Marcus looked up at his wife, afraid to speak the words that might shatter this fragile possibility. "I think," he said carefully, "we need to call Dr. Chen." On the 3rd morning after their return from Rome, Elena woke to a sound she hadn't heard in months, Sophia crying with the robust, demanding wail of a healthy baby. Not the weak whimpers that had become their heartbreaking normal, but a full-throated cry that sent Elena bolting upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She rushed to the crib expecting to find Sophia in distress, but what she discovered made her legs nearly buckle beneath her. Their daughter lay on her back, arms moving with purposeful energy, her tiny fists opening and closing as she protested being ignored. Her cheeks, which had been pale and drawn for so long, glowed with a pink flush of vitality that Elena had almost forgotten was possible. "Marcus!" she called, her voice cracking with an emotion too large for words. "Marcus, come here, now!" Marcus appeared in the doorway, still half asleep, but one look at Elena's face brought him fully alert. He approached the crib cautiously, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever miraculous moment they were witnessing. When he looked down at Sophia, his sharp intake of breath confirmed what Elena's mother's heart was screaming. Sophia turned her head toward her father's voice, her dark eyes bright and focused in a way they hadn't been since before the diagnosis. When Marcus reached down to touch her face, she grasped his finger with a strength that made him gasp. The monitoring equipment that had become the soundtrack to their lives showed readings that defied everything Dr. Chen had told them to expect. "This isn't possible," Marcus whispered, But even as he spoke the words, he was lifting Sophia from her crib, marveling at the way she settled into his arms with the contented sigh of a child who was no longer fighting for every breath. Her breathing came easy and even, without the mechanical assistance that had become essential to her survival. Elena's hands shook as she disconnected the oxygen tube, waiting for some sign of distress that never came. Sophia continued to breathe normally, her color remaining vibrant, her eyes tracking their movements with the alert curiosity of a healthy 8-month-old discovering her world. They stood together in their living room, surrounded by medical equipment that suddenly seemed unnecessary, holding their daughter who 3 days ago had been dying and who now gurgled softly as she played with Marcus's shirt collar. The morning light streaming through their windows felt different somehow, warmer, more golden, illuminated with possibility rather than casting shadows of despair. Elena touched the spot on Sophia's forehead, where Pope Leo XIV had placed his gentle kiss, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to believe in miracles. Dr. Chen's expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine bewilderment as she examined Sophia in the sterile brightness of the pediatric examination room. Marcus and Elena watched her hands move with practiced precision, checking reflexes, listening to heart rhythms, and testing responses that had been worryingly absent just days before. The doctor's silence stretched longer than usual, punctuated only by Sophia's contented babbling as she reached for the colorful toys dangling from the examination table. "I need to run some tests," Dr. Chen said finally, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying to process information that challenged everything she understood about pediatric neurology. "The neurological responses I'm seeing, they're not consistent with Sophia's previous condition." Elena felt her heart hammering as they moved through the familiar corridors toward the imaging department. Sophia alert and curious in her arms, rather than the listless child they'd carried. Through these same hallways so many times before, other medical staff, who had become unwilling participants in their journey, did double takes as they passed, their faces reflecting the same confusion that Dr. Chen was struggling to hide. The MRI room hummed with its characteristic mechanical symphony as Sophia was prepared for the scan that would either confirm their miracle or reveal some medical explanation they hadn't considered. Marcus paced the waiting area while Elena sat motionless, afraid that moving might somehow jinx whatever extraordinary thing was happening to their daughter. When Dr. Chen emerged from the imaging suite an hour later, she carried Sophia's scans with the reverent care of someone handling religious artifacts. Her face was pale, her usual clinical composure visibly shaken. "I've compared these to Sophia's previous imaging," she said, spreading the films across. The light board, with hands that trembled slightly. The mass that was pressing against her brain stem. "It's reduced by approximately 90%. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus stared at the scans, seeing the dramatic difference even with his untrained eyes. Where once a dark shadow had threatened his daughter's life, now only the faintest trace remained, barely visible against the healthy tissue surrounding. Is this normal?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer from Dr. Chen's expression. Dr. Chen removed her glasses and cleaned them with unnecessary precision, buying time to formulate words for something that defied medical explanation. "In 30 years of pediatric oncology," she said finally, "I have never seen a tumor regression of this magnitude occur so rapidly without intervention. Frankly, Mrs. Castellanos, this shouldn't be possible." Sophia gurgled happily from her father's arms, reaching toward the light board as if the images of her own healing were simply another fascinating toy to explore. 6 months later, their living room had been transformed from a medical station back into a family space where Sophia crawled across carpet that had once been covered with monitors and equipment. The sound of her laughter filled spaces that had been heavy with whispered prayers and desperate hope, creating a symphony of normalcy that Marcus and Eleanor never took for granted. The portable oxygen tank sat in storage now, a relic of darker days that they kept as a reminder of how far they'd traveled from that first devastating diagnosis. Sophia pulled herself up to standing against the coffee table, her chubby hands gripping the edge as she bounced on unsteady legs, babbling in the universal language of happy babies. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, still catching her breath at moments like these, ordinary milestones that felt extraordinary when you'd been told your child would never reach them. Every giggle, every curious reach for a forbidden object, every stubborn refusal to eat vegetables carried the weight of a miracle that had defied medical explanation. The story of Sophia's recovery had spread far beyond their small circle, carried by word of mouth through their parish, their neighborhood, and eventually to journalists who struggled to find medical explanations for what the Castellanos family simply called their miracle. Marcus and Elena found themselves reluctant celebrities, fielding calls from television producers and magazine writers who wanted to package their experience into digestible segments about faith and healing. Interview requests arrived daily, each one promising to handle their story with sensitivity, while clearly seeking the dramatic elements that would capture viewers' attention. "We don't need to prove anything to anyone," Elena told Marcus during one of their evening conversations, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her crib nearby, the same crib where they'd once kept vigil against losing her. "What happened to us? What Pope Leo XIV did for our family. It doesn't need validation from strangers." Marcus nodded, understanding that their miracle belonged to them first, to Sophia first, and that sharing it required careful consideration of how it might be used or misunderstood by others. Yet they felt a profound responsibility to share their story with other families facing similar darkness. Letters arrived weekly from parents whose children battled impossible diagnoses, seeking hope in the Castellanos family's journey from despair to joy. Marcus and Elena read each one carefully, understanding that their miracle carried with it an obligation to offer comfort to others walking the path they'd once traveled. They responded personally to every letter, never promising miracles, but always offering the one thing they could guarantee. They understood the weight of loving a dying child. Dr. Chen continued to monitor Sophia's progress with the fascination of a scientist studying a phenomenon that challenged everything she'd learned in medical school. The tumor showed no signs of returning. Sophia's neurological development proceeded normally, and her medical file had become something of a legend among the pediatric staff who'd witnessed her transformation. Medical students were occasionally brought in to hear Sophia's case history, though Dr. Chen was careful to present it as an unexplained remission rather than making claims about divine intervention. "She's perfect," Dr. Chen said during Sophia's latest checkup, watching the toddler attempt to dismantle her otoscope with determined concentration. "Whatever happened that day in Rome, I may not be able to explain it medically, but I can't argue with the results." She paused, studying Sophia with the wonder that never quite faded. "Sometimes medicine reaches its limits, and we have to acknowledge that there are forces at work beyond our understanding." Father Miguel visited regularly, marveling at the little girl who'd been dying in his arms during their desperate flight to Rome, and who now treated him as her favorite jungle gym. He never claimed credit for facilitating the miracle, but Marcus and Elena could see the quiet satisfaction in his eyes when he watched Sophia play, the contentment of someone who'd helped connect faith with its ultimate expression. His own faith had been strengthened by witnessing Sophia's recovery, proof that his years of service had been part of something larger than individual devotion. As Sophia took her first tentative steps between her parents' outstretched arms, stumbling and laughing with the pure joy of discovery, Marcus thought about the kiss that had changed everything. Pope Leo XIV's gentle benediction had been more than a blessing. It had been a reminder that love could overcome the impossible, that grace existed in forms too profound for science to measure. They would carry this miracle forward, not as proof of their own worthiness, but as a testament to hope itself, a story that belonged as much to every desperate parent as it did to them.